This is an introduction into relationship dynamics. We're going to explore how people and what people think so we can influence with integrity. My name is Marcel Elvers and I'm the author of We Are the Same, It's the Details That Differ. I also authored Relationship Dynamics, which is an abbreviated version and supports this particular presentation. We all want the same things. We want attention, security and autonomy. We want to be appreciated for who we are, feel safe with the ones we are with, and make our own choices, the choices we deem best for us. The Enneagram is a triadic system, and each type favors one thing over the other. So types 2, 3, 4 favor attention seeking, 5, 6, 7 security seeking, and 8, 9, 1 autonomy seeking. Now, if you are an attention seeking 2, 3, 4, apparently you don't feel appreciated for who you are. Therefore, you tend to have self-worth and shame issues. They compensate by presenting an idealized self-image, an image of an altruist, of a success, of being different. The security-seeking 5, 6 and 7 apparently don't feel safe with the ones they are with, and therefore they have fears and anxieties. They learn to displace their anxieties by being competent, becoming dutiful, and staying preoccupied in activities. The autonomy-seeking 8, 9s and 1s feel they cannot rely on others and therefore they focus on becoming self-reliant. They tend to have anger and relating to others issues. They repress their anger and present themselves as strong, indifferent, and idealistic. But all of us seek the same three things. You see, if you're an idealistic type 1, then you feel self-relying by setting your own standards, you get attention by helping to improve the world, and you feel secure when you live by your rules. The altruistic 2 earns love and appreciation, that is how they get their attention, feel secure by being good first to others, and feel self-reliant when their needs are met. And we can apply this to any type, but how do we get there? You see, all of us own a behavioral pathway. It starts with being born with natural abilities and then we are influenced by our environment. It's the nature and nurture model. And through our interaction, of course, we learn to identify with our role models who provide us with a message, how we think they view us. That gives us an internal dialogue and therefore a perspective of ourselves and the world. Of course, we own an early behavioral style based on fear, fight, flight responses. We learn to process information in a certain way. We favor certain defense mechanisms, and we have a behavioral style in social settings or a social style. All of this leads to a behavioral pattern, and that pattern turns out to be distinct, consistent, and therefore identifiable. So, how do we relate to our role models? That is where it all starts. That is the foundation of our perspective. Well, we can feel attached, frustrated, or rejected by our role models. Now you can see I used M and F for mother and father, but what it really stands for is the traditional role mother and father played in our lives. The mother being the emotional nurturer, the ones who mimics you and identifies with you. The father being the basic provider and protector. And of course both, in their own right, are guides. Now there is a pattern in the Enneagram model. Look here. The types with inadequate emotional nurturance are 3, 7 and 8, so they identify with the mother. The types with inadequate guidance and or support are 6, 1 and 2, who relate to the father. And the types that did not feel acknowledged, so there was inadequate acknowledgement, relate to both. And through our interaction, we have a perceived message, how we think our role models look at us and how we feel about ourselves. That becomes our internal dialogue and therefore a key fear. For the one, it's I'm not good enough. For the two, it's I'm not worthy of love. Threes believe they're not worthy unless they succeed. Fours feel different and therefore excluded. Fives feel their needs are not important to others and therefore not acknowledged. Sixes don't feel supported. Sevens don't feel nurtured. Eights don't feel safe. Actually, they feel vulnerable. And nines don't feel important enough to be listened to. And of course, you learn to compensate for that. So if you're a one and you don't feel good enough, you learn to be better, even perfect. And you learn to earn love. You learn to succeed. You learn to distinguish yourself to fit in. You learn to be competent and provide specialized knowledge. You learn to find support or maintain support. You find your own nurturance or fulfillment. You learn to be self-reliant and protect yourself. And nines want to have tranquility, peace and quiet. And so each type from that perspective assesses any information through a very specific filter. If you strive to be perfect, then you will always ask yourself, is this right or wrong? Can I do better? A two will always ask themselves, is what I'm doing going to provide me with love and appreciation? Threes will ask themselves, am I succeeding? Do they see me as a success? Fours will ask themselves, is what I'm doing giving me inclusion? Fives, who provide specialized knowledge to fit in, ask themselves constantly, is this true or not true? Sixes, am I supported? Sevens, will this satisfy me? Eights constantly look at from a perspective of, am I safe? Are they going to harm me? And nines, will I have peace? And so, from that filter, you learn to manipulate others to get what you want. Ones will set standards and correct others because they know right from wrong. Twos will figure out your needs and then make themselves needed. Threes are charming and adopt an image so they act like you, so they gain your cooperation and alliances. Fours get attention by becoming emotionally unavailable through moodiness. Fives preoccupy themselves and keep their emotional distance so they have time to think. Sixes will complain and test your support. Sevens will distract you and then gain what they need, fulfillment, through your assistance. Eights will just fill a room and throw their weight around to keep themselves safe. And nines tend to check out and passively resist you. You see, it's one building block on top of another. One thing leads to another. But from that perspective, you can also see that each type has typical conflicts. One's about who is right. Two's about being angry about not reciprocated love. Threes typically have problems with others feeling exploited. Fours easily feel hurt about being misunderstood, and others are frustrated with them because they're unable to explain their emotions. Others complain about fives about being distant and unavailable. Others get frustrated with sixes about the constant questioning and not moving forward. Sevens get into trouble because they're impulsive and move forward irrationally. Eights get into trouble about their directness and bluntness. And nines get into trouble because others just don't know what they think because they don't express their opinions. This also means as everybody tries to do the best to get what they want the most, their core needs and key needs, that each type needs acknowledgement for a specific thing. A 1 tries to be perfect, so they want acknowledgement for their standards. A 2 helps you out to get what you need, so they want to be appreciated for being good to you. 3s want to be seen as a success, so they like to hear they performed well. 4s feel excluded and different, so they want to be acknowledged for who they are. 5s want to provide specialized knowledge to fit in, so they like to be acknowledged for their competence. 6s are dutiful and want to be acknowledged for being compliant, for doing what is expected of them. 7s need gratification, so they want you to help them what they want to get. 8s feel vulnerable and protect themselves, so you need to respect their authority. 9s want peace and quiet, so they need space. And these perspectives establish really early. This is obviously a door hanger written by a kid. So he locks himself up in the room, does not want to be disturbed, and he emphasizes knowledge through the word genius. It's probably a 5. This 8-year-old set up a lemonade stand to help pay the bills for his dad's illness. Probably a 2. Praise me for being good to you. If the shoe fits, buy it in every color. So if there are 10 different colors, you get 10 different pairs. That is gluttonous. Help me get what I want, and I want it all. It's never enough. Probably a type 7. So when I look at people, I see patterns, because we always reveal ourselves with whatever we do or don't. And that is because we only talk about one thing, and that is what is important to us. I received a text message on April the 30th. It said, "How was New York?" And I replied with, "New York is on May the 16th. I am prepping the presentation right now." Reply, "Fun. You'll be on the other side of the States, one end to the other." You see, I never ask myself, why mention the obvious? I ask myself actually, why is this important enough to mention? And this is why. My friend moved from Helena, Montana to Charleston, South Carolina recently, and therefore she was reflecting on her own experience. So no matter how trivial it might be to you, it was apparently important enough for the other person to mention. Always keep that in mind. So we all develop an early behavioral style based on the fear, fight and flight response. Now Freud also talked about that with his id, superego and ego. Now the id requires immediate gratification, and it's all about impulse. So these types tend to be independent, they make things happen, they assert themselves, and they really don't let others stop them. So these types are assertive and insistent, and these types are 3, 7 and 8. Now remember, these types had inadequate nurturance, so they focus on finding nurturance. I want it, and I want it now. The superego weighs morals and values and is all about impulse control. These types tend to be responsible. They follow rules. They are dedicated to rules. They're reliable, trustworthy. They do what needs to be done. That is akin to the fear response. Therefore, they are dedicated to rules and reliable to follow through. Type 6, 1 and 2 are superego oriented. Now remember, they received inadequate guidance. and therefore they focus on finding guidance and follow rules. They will ask themselves, is this good or bad, or is this right or wrong? The ego mediates between gratifications, morals and values. And therefore, they tend to be reserved, and they like being by themselves and stay out of the limelight. They come over as passive, but reality is they just take time to think and find a measured response. They solve problems in their heads. Therefore, they withdraw to think and use imagination to solve problems. Types 9, 4, and 5 are therefore ego-oriented. Now remember, they were not really acknowledged, and they focus on finding acknowledgement. They ask themselves, I want it, but do I actually need it? Of course, we also present ourselves in social settings in a certain way. You see, some people tend to control themselves and don't really share their feelings that much. They tend to keep their distance and may even come over as aloof. Types 3, 1, and 5 present themselves as logical and methodical. Others have strong feelings and readily show them because they want you to feel the way they do. When they are upset, they want you to be upset. When they are happy, they will make you happy. And therefore, types 6, 4, and 8 are emphatic and demonstrative. Others are just enthusiastic and go for it. They move forward without thinking. They believe things will work out as they go along. The glass is half full. They love people and they want to make them happy. So types 9, 2, and 7 are positive-minded and people-oriented. So I made clear by telling all these things about the different types that our core perspective is not the same. We work from a foundation of idealism, altruism, success, uniqueness, competence, dutifulness, preoccupation, forcefulness, and indifference. And we don't respond the same. We can use fear, fight, or flight. Now let's add this to it. We also don't process information the same. You see, there are 3 processing centers: head, heart, and gut. Gut reactions, strong emotions, and reasoning. Also called reasoning, intuition, and instinct. And I prefer to call them think, feel, and do. Also called objectivity, subjectivity, and reactivity. The primary types are in the center of each triad, 3, 6, and 9. And they process information primarily in the 2 triads opposite of their own. So a 3 is reactive and objective, and they disconnect their emotions. 6s are reactive and subjective and disconnect reasoning. 9s are subjective and objective and disconnect reactivity. The secondary types primarily process information in the triad they are in, so 2 and 4 are the feelers, subjective, emotional, the heart. 5 and 7 are the thinkers, more objective, and they reason. And 8 and 1s are highly reactive, they are the doers, instinctive. Now, there is more to these processing styles, but I'm going to leave it at this for now. So, we don't only have a different perspective, a different filter, and a different response. We also don't think the same. Reactive, subjective, objective. Now, personality might be best defined as a repetitive response to our internal dialogue. In other words, how we think and feel determines what we do. Think, feel, do. And this becomes a pervasive theme because, as said, it is a repetitive response. and we repeat what we know best. And when you repeat things, it becomes a pattern that is distinct, consistent, and therefore identifiable. And when you repeat the same thing over and over again, that means you focus on something and that becomes your strength. Now I'm going to describe each type and build one building block on top of another. So if your perspective as a 3 is I must succeed, then your strength is perseverance. You learn to persevere. But if you need to win at all cost, you are exploitative, and that's a weakness. That also means that you're not willing to acknowledge personal failure. And since you need to be seen as a success, you tend to overstate your abilities. Therefore, your vice is deceit. Their ego defense mechanism is identification. They act as if they're like you in order to gain your cooperation. That makes us think of Donald Trump. You see, type 3s see themselves as admirable, desirable, and ambitious. Others see them as self-promoting, opportunistic, exploitative, and deceptive. 7s stay preoccupied in activity, so they learn to come into action or spontaneity. But if you're getting involved in too many activities, then you are hyperactive and you don't appreciate any of them because you don't have time to reflect on what you just did. That also means that you don't see your personal limitations and you tend to overdo things, so your vice is gluttony. Your ego defense mechanism is therefore rationalization. You put positive twists on negatives and obscure your true motivations. Think about Elton John. Talk about a gluttonous outfit. They see themselves as enthusiastic, adventurous, fun, spontaneous, but others may see them as erratic and reckless and hyperactive. 8s feel vulnerable and therefore protect themselves by being strong and forthcoming. But if you have too much candor, you become direct and blunt, and then you don't see the emotional impact you have on others. Therefore, you have a lust for power, for being in charge. Their ego defense mechanism is flat out denying something happened or existed. Think about Nancy Grace. They see themselves as assertive, strong and empowering, yet others may see them as domineering, intimidating and even dictatorial. Now when you look at the assertive assistants, the ones that had inadequate nurturance and therefore try to find nurturance, they share these qualities. All 3 of them, but they favor one over the other. So these types are opportunistic, optimistic, and self-reliant. The 6 fears lack of support, so they do what is expected of them to maintain support, therefore they develop loyalty. But when you're too loyal, it might become blind obedience, and it also means that there is an overestimation of authority. You're not thinking about what you're doing because you let somebody else decide for you. And all out of fear for lack of support. And their ego defense mechanism is projection, meaning they project their own weaknesses onto others. Think about Rush Limbaugh. They see themselves as reliable, trustworthy and dependable, but others see them as dependent, defensive and blaming others. Ones provide personal standards. They believe they know right from wrong, therefore they become idealistic. But if you're too rigid in your opinion, then you don't see gray areas anymore. You don't allow others their opinion. Their vice is wrath. explosive anger outbursts when others are not trying as hard as a 1 to be perfect, to do the right thing. Their ego defense mechanism is reaction formation, which is, for instance, acting nice while you actually dislike a person. Think about Bill O'Reilly. They see themselves as prudent, objective, reasonable, but others may see them as inflexible, critical and judgmental, and even punitive. 2s must earn love and appreciation, so they learn to be good to you, therefore they develop empathy. But if you're so gung-ho on earning love and appreciation, you might start providing unwanted help and forget your own needs because you hone in onto the needs of others. Their vice is pride in being needed, and they repress or not acknowledge their own needs. Think about the late Princess Diana. They see themselves as loving, caring, giving, but others may see them as demonstrative, intrusive, and even manipulative and coercive. Now, when you look at these types, they all share these qualities because they all have inadequate guidance and they seek guidance. So they are conforming, fundamentalistic, and altruistic. The 9s need to avoid conflict because they fear abandonment. Therefore, they become agreeable and amicable and develop tolerance. But when you're too tolerant, you become complacent. And therefore, you're not expressing your personal preferences in order to avoid that conflict. That means your vice is sloth. You learn to passively, aggressively resist others. Their ego defense mechanism is narcotization. They withdraw and start doing highly repetitive, mind-numbing tasks. Think about Sandra Bullock. They see themselves as easygoing, relaxed, amicable. Others may see them as complacent and disengaged. 4s feel different and excluded. Therefore, they learn to distinguish themselves to be noticed, and they learn to become original. They also feel that others have something that they don't, so something is missing, and they're constantly searching for what's missing. And once they find something that was missing, the next thing will be missing, and this leads to chronic disappointment. Therefore, 4s tend to be prone to melancholy. That also means that they focus on what others have instead of what they have themselves, so they don't acknowledge personal qualities. Their vice is envy. They covet what others have and that what's not available. Their ego defense mechanism is introjection, meaning applying environmental negative aspects to themselves. Think about Marilyn Manson. They see themselves as unique, gentle, sensitive, different. But others may see them as moody, temperamental, self-indulgent, self-inhibiting. 5s learn to provide specialized knowledge in order to fit in. It has to be specialized knowledge because it must be something that somebody else has not offered yet. Therefore, they are inquisitive and learn that they must understand something before they provide it. Therefore, their strength is discernment. However, you can also spend too much time in knowing everything about something, including the minute details. And then it might develop into useless overspecialization. That also means you live in your head and you're so focused on one thing only that you don't see all the things that are around you already. In other words, abundance. The vice of a 5 is avarice or greed, best explained as retention of knowledge. Their ego defense mechanism is isolation. They keep their distance from people physically, they lock themselves up in a room, and they keep their emotional distance from others in order not to be obligated. Think about Rachel Maddow. They see themselves as inquisitive, intelligent, smart, insightful. But also, others may see them as preoccupied, eccentric, and over-specialized. Think about Ted Kaczynski. Again, all these types share these qualities and favor their own qualities over the other two. And remember, they all feel abandoned, rejected, and insignificant because they received inadequate acknowledgement. So they tend to be pessimistic, realistic, and conversationalists. So we might believe that others think the way we do. We might believe that others see our perspective. Reality is nothing is further from the truth. So we don't have the same perspective and we don't think the same. Now here is a news item, an Ebola outbreak in 2014. Volunteer nurse Casey Hickox returned from Sierra Leone with Doctors Without Borders. She said she was not infected and had no symptoms. Now that is a significant statement because the CDC on their website wrote, Ebola spreads through direct bodily fluid contact with broken skin or mucus. That's why she knows she's not infected, because she knew how to prevent it. And an infected person must have symptoms in order to infect others. Well, I have no symptoms. No, says Chris Christie. CDC is wrong. We are right. She must be quarantined. It's my duty to protect the people. Now, Chris Christie is a type 8. Ego defense mechanism. Denial. And what is their perspective? Well, as a child, 8s feel vulnerable and learn to protect themselves by being strong and forthcoming and reactive. And if you learn to protect yourself, you will later in life project that on the world as a whole. So his perspective, his core perspective, shines through. I must protect the people. Now, without a doubt, a Facebook discussion will ensue. It's between a 2 and a 5. Now, the 2's perspective is, I must be good to others and repress my own needs. The 2 said, if there was the slightest chance I was infected, I'd self-quarantine for 21 days or even more. Therefore, Hickox is irresponsible. Well, said the 5, no. We know how Ebola spreads. She has no symptoms, is not infected. To quarantine her is unnecessary and without merit. Well, it's still in its infancy. Not true. We have known how Ebola spreads for years. You see, the 2 acted out her emotions. The 5 needs abstract understanding. You see how their perspectives shine through? Yet both want exactly the same thing. Public safety. A week later, a judge rejected the quarantine, and let's go over these internal dialogues once more. 8s, I must protect. 2s, I must be good. 5s, I must understand. And how do they process the information? Reactively, subjectively, objectively. And they come to complete different conclusions. The 2 might, for instance, say, Chris Christie was good to the public. He tried to protect them, and I relate to being good. He is my presidential candidate. The 5 says, he's a bully. Number 1, he overreacts. Number 2, he completely denies basic facts. Before we know it, we're in another war because he's reactive. He's certainly not my presidential candidate. And so Our perspective is our reality. All these people are type 8s. Nancy Grace, Governor Christie, Gloria Allred, Mike Ditka, Idi Amin, Rosie O'Donnell, and Fidel Castro. They all feel vulnerable, learn to protect themselves, and therefore become over as strong and forthcoming. They can be direct, blunt, and dominant. Now you can tell them, stop bullying. But they will think, what? And not protect myself? Come on. And therefore, they are the same. It's just the details that differ. So we need to learn to look and listen, observe people's behavioral and social style, look at their stress reactions because that exaggerates their normal behavior, figure out how they process information, and listen to what they say because that reveals their perspective. And that what repeats the most is a trending pattern. That also means this, that you know their core needs, which is either attention, security, or autonomy. You will know their core issues, self-worth, fear, anger. You will understand their internal dialogue. I'm not good enough, not worthy of love, not worthy unless I succeed. I'm different and excluded. My needs are not important, I'm not acknowledged. I don't feel supported and have no guidance. I don't feel nurtured. I don't feel safe. I'm not important. And that leads to a key fear, which means I don't want to be bad or corrupt. I don't want to be without love, without value. I don't want to feel excluded. I don't want to feel incompetent. I don't want to feel without support and guidance. I don't want to feel deprived. I don't want to be harmed. I don't want to be abandoned. Which means they will have a key need. I must be better, earn love, succeed, find what's missing, be competent, find support, find gratification, be in charge, and have peace and quiet. Which leads, of course, to strengths. Idealism, empathy, perseverance, originality, discernment, loyalty, spontaneity, candor, and tolerance. And a weakness, rigidity, providing unwanted help, exploitation, chronic disappointment, useless overspecialization, blind obedience, hyperactivity, bluntness, and complacency. And with all that, they want acknowledgement for one specific thing. My standards, being good, performance for who I am, competence, dutifulness, assistance in getting what I want, my authority, and I need space. And when you realize that, when you can recognize these patterns and come to these realizations, you will be able to influence with integrity. So why do you want to look and listen? Well, the quality of a relationship is measured by how much the needs of those involved are met. And you want to meet other people's needs because your success depends on how well you work with others. And that means you need to meet the core need of any type. Give them what they want to be acknowledged for. Which is, again, I want to be acknowledged for my standards. I want to be appreciated for being good. I want performance acknowledgement. I want to be accepted for who I am. I want to be appreciated for my competence. I want to be acknowledged for doing what is expected of me. I want your assistance for getting what I want. I want you to respect my authority, and I need space. Give them what they want, because a person who feels appreciated will always do more than what is expected. Because you will gain their cooperation and alliance because they like you. You gave them what they needed the most. Now my question to you is, what is your core perspective? And more importantly, remember when you were a child, you had no idea what your inner critic was? You had no idea of how to explain what you really needed and how you felt about your parents. But now you are a parent. And you have a kid who's not able to explain that to you. So what is the core perspective of your child? And if you look and listen and you observe behavioral and social styles, what their stress reactions are, exaggeration of behaviors, and you listen to what they say and you hear their perspective, you will figure out what their core needs are and what their issues are. And that means that you can influence your child with integrity. You can give them what they need without them having to tell you what it is they need. And with it, you can give them the biggest gift of all: self-esteem. And what about your partner, your co-worker, or the barista at the coffee stand? This is the end of the presentation. I can be reached at marcel.elvers@gmail.com. I'm available for speaking engagements, online and on-site training and consultation.